Beethoven's DNA has been analyzed after 200 years from his locks of hair. A new study analyzed the famous composer's genes to get a better understanding of the health problems that plagued him. We know that his last symphony he composed while he was deaf, and he had a standing ovation from it, and he had to be turned around by people that were with him on the stage so that he can face the audience, so that he himself could see how happy they were with his composition. Now, a new study analyzed the famous composer's genes to get a better understanding of his health problems that plagued him. In a finding almost 200 years in the making, researchers have analyzed Beethoven's DNA using samples of hair to better understand the ailments of the famous composer. The researchers' analysis shows that neither his hearing loss nor his frequent stomach issues were caused by Beethoven's genes. However, the liver disease that ultimately led to his death probably did have a genetic basis and was spurred on by a lingering hepatitis B infection. Plus, in a surprising twist that came about through the genetic analysis and reconstructing potential family trees, researchers have uncovered that someone on Beethoven's father's side had an extramarital affair resulting in a child. It may even have been Beethoven's father, potentially making Beethoven an illegitimate son. Their work was inspired by a wish Beethoven made in an 1802 document where he requested that doctors investigate the cause of his hearing loss and that the findings be made public. The study is published today in Current Biology. Probably the most well-known of Beethoven's health problems is his hearing loss, which led Beethoven to shutter himself away and contemplate suicide, but the artist was so plagued with bouts of pain in his ribs and gut and extreme weakness stemming from issues with his digestive system, as well as jaundice from his failing and scarred liver. Medical biographers have previously pieced together a picture of Beethoven's health, mostly from letters he wrote and diaries he kept, as well as written accounts from his physician, and an autopsy report following his death. Some have also performed chemical analysis on the composer's hairs and bits of his skull. Some of these samples have been deemed inauthentic. Beethoven really is kind of he's unique because of the enormous literature on his health problems. So it was really a unique chance to use molecular genetic methods to add something to this, said study co-author and geneticist from University of Bonn, Markus Nothen, in a press briefing. In this latest study, researchers analyzed DNA from 8 locks of Beethoven's hair, totally some 3 meters in length. They verified the authenticity of 5 of these fragments, both by tracking who looked after the hair over time, the provenance, histories, and looking closely at features of the DNA itself, like that the damage matches up to the expected age of the samples. Researchers could not link Beethoven's hearing or gut problems with his genes. However, they did not totally rule out a genetic cause. Unlike in ancient times, DNA in ancient hair is highly degraded, so we have very strong fragments of DNA, said co-author Johannes Krauss from the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in a press briefing. This meant Nothen, Krauss, and his team were not able to sequence Beethoven's entire genome, and their analysis could not detect some particular genetic mutation. Krauss said it's really hard to get enough DNA from hair to assemble a genome. That means other theories surrounding Beethoven's notable hearing loss still linger. One is otosclerosis, where a spongy, bony nub grows in the middle ear and prevents the ear bones from vibrating properly. Another is Paget's disease, where the ear bone becomes more fragile. And I know what my music teacher told us, and I'll tell you at the end of the video, because, I used to take piano lessons, and we had to learn the lives of each of the composers that we played the pieces of. For example, Bach, Mozart, Beethoven, Chopin, etc., Haydn, Schubert. Now, these diseases and a host of other possibilities might have a genetic aspect to them, but study co-author Tristan Begg, a PhD student in biological anthropology at Max Planck Institute for the Science of Human History, said they could not test this theory. We did not have sufficient reference data to actually assess Beethoven's risk for autosclerosis, but it has to be stressed that diagnostic accuracy for assessing autosclerosis would not be great, it would just be a start. The team did, however, find that Beethoven's genes predisposed him to liver disease. They also detected fragments of DNA from the hepatitis B virus that had become lodged in the hair strands. It tells us that at least in the last few months before his death, he was infected with hepatitis B. It could have been earlier, said Krauss. Putting all of the information together, the researchers think that Beethoven's liver disease was caused by a mix of his genes, his well-documented and long-running alcoholism, and the hepatitis B virus, a virus that spread through sex, but also through sharing needles or during pregnancy. There's no evidence to say how Beethoven became infected. And again, I'm going to tell you the end, what our music teacher told us of his disease and how he died. Now, David Brotto, a medical doctor specializing in audiology and who was not involved in the study, told Motherboard that this study confirms what he and his colleagues suspected in a previous study, that the liver was involved in many of Beethoven's underlying health problems. From what I get, Beethoven was a person with fragile genetics and a fragile liver that got worse because of his alcoholic attitude. This explains his gastrointestinal symptoms and the hearing loss as well, and also the composer's behavioral issues. There are, of course, limits to what researchers can glean about Beethoven's health issues. A great problem in medicine is the subjective perception of the symptom, which makes it difficult to be understood by the physician, said Brotto. Like others writing on Beethoven's illnesses, Brotto and his team relied on historical records and letters between Beethoven and his doctor. However, Brotto notes that some of these reports may be biased by his psychological status, by his frustration of not getting a good diagnosis, and also the limitations of the medical knowledge in the time he lived in. Then there are the things that don't show up in letters, such as euphemistically dubbed extra-pair paternity event. This latest study uncovered. The finding came when researchers analyzed Y chromosomes from 5 living descendants of the Beethoven lineage. These genetics could be traced back to an ancestor who lived in the 16th century. However, when the team compared Beethoven's Y chromosome to those of his living descendants, they did not match. That told researchers that sometime in the 7 generations between the 16th century ancestor and Beethoven's birth, someone had an affair resulting in a child. You would not necessarily expect that such an event to be documented. These would probably be clandestine in nature, said Begg. It may have been Beethoven's father, although Begg and his colleagues are not weighing in one way or the other. If you are completely agnostic to the historical record and you know there has been an extra pair of paternity event at some point in the 7 generations above Beethoven, you cannot rule out that Beethoven himself may have been illegitimate, said Begg. I'm not advocating for that. I'm simply saying it's a possibility, he said. And now, what did our music teacher tell us? Obviously, he was a great composer. He was the one that was the father of the symphony orchestra. He also introduced the piano as being part of the symphony orchestra. He had 7 houses because he was playing music all day long and he was composing on his piano, and the neighbors just couldn't take it anymore. And so he had 7 houses, and of course, it was so expensive for him to have 7 dwellings. He had to change every day, that he basically went bankrupt. And also, our music teacher said that he died of syphilis. As we know, syphilis attacks the brain and the nervous system. Okay, you lose your sight, you lose your hearing, you lose a lot of things having to do with your nerves. So that's what she said, that he had syphilis. So this is by Mariam Guzgan on Vice. Please leave your comments and thank you for your support. Kindly support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support. and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box